Hello, how's it going? Hope you're doing well today. Welcome back to Alfred's Basic Adult Piano Course, Lesson Book Level 1. This video is Lesson 81, and we're going to cover pages 96 and 97 in our book today, the song Over the Rainbow. All right, so welcome back. Thanks for coming back. I hope you're enjoying this book because we are nearing the end. On page 96, we finally hit the performance section of the book. So that means everything from 96 on is strictly going to be these performance pieces, which are great selections for recitals or just having fun playing. These are popular pieces that I think most of you will probably recognize. They are the most challenging pieces in the book. But it's basically an accumulation of everything you've learned. So every one of these pieces, there's no new information. There might be something here or there, but really for the most part, this is all review, everything just compiled now into piece. So this is really what it boils down to. We're getting to some really good, well-arranged music, recognizable pieces, and now applying everything we've learned thus far. So that being said, I'm not going to go in the amount of detail in these pieces that I've been doing all along. I'm still going to break this way down. This is still going to be a pretty lengthy video. But if you remember the last video, Amazing Grace, that went well over an hour because there was so much information. Now, a lot of that had to do with the triplet. Which does take a long time to explain. Triplets can be quite confusing, but hopefully you've got that down. We're not going to use a triplet in Over the Rainbow, so if you feel like you've had enough of that and need a little bit of a break, you're going to get it here. But if I went through every single note and every single finger for every note, we'd be here well over an hour. So I want to try to keep these videos at least less than an hour, but at the same time, break it down still enough that everything's easy to understand. I'm going to focus more on some of the more challenging spots, the spots that you're going to want to practice again and again and really look more into. All right, so at the very beginning, we are in the key of C major. So no sharps and no flats, but if you scan through the music, that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to encounter all white keys. There's actually quite a bit of accidentals in this piece. We've got flats, we've got sharps, and we've even got a fair amount of naturals thrown in too. So there will be a lot of accidentals even though we are in the key of C major. I am going to start with the right hand, which I often do because it is the melody, and in this case it is the melody throughout the entire piece. I don't see anywhere where the left hand is melody. So it is all in the right hand. And we do have a good deal of pedal, and that's going to be the case for most of these pieces. So later on in the video, we'll switch over and get our pedal camera out. Although at this point, you should be familiar with pedaling. However, it occurs a little more frequently in this piece because the chord changes are more frequent. So we'll get into that a little bit later. But let's start with our right hand. Now, we've spent the majority of this book going into positions like C position, G position, and so on and so forth. We've kind of worked our way out of that. So we're not really in those positions anymore. However, they can still occur maybe at the beginning of a piece or maybe throughout. That being said, our right hand does kind of start in the C position. So our first note is thumb on middle C. But you notice that the next two notes, it's a big stretch. Now, when you have a jump like that and you notice there's a legato marking above all of this, so is this meant to be smooth? When you have a big jump like that, it's impossible to be smooth. And that's why there's going to be pedal later on. So the pedaling will make all this smooth. So that being said, don't worry about trying to stretch to this E and C here. Just make it a nice, effortless, easy jump and let the pedal do the rest of the work. All right, so those are just half notes. So you got middle C for 2 counts, E and C for 2 counts. And if I didn't mention it earlier, we're in 4/4 time, 4 beats per measure. We do have a lot of eighth notes. So you may want to count with the 1 and 2 and system because of all the eighth notes. Now, when they don't mention fingering, like in measure 2, it's what I call logical fingering. So this will help us avoid going through the fingering for every single note. I'm currently on the E and the C, right? 1 on the E, 5 on the C. So logical fingering, as I call it, is what fingers are on what notes. And the next note is a B. So my 4th finger's on that B. So I'm going to play that B with my 4th finger. My next 2 notes are 8th notes, G and A. Well, that's going to be my 2nd and 3rd finger, right? Because they're right there. On beat 3, I've got B again. So that's the 4th finger. And on beat 4, I've got my 5th finger, C. So that's what I call logical fingering. If they don't put the fingering in, it's just whatever is logical, and most of the time, what finger's on the note, that's what you're going to use. Now, in the next measure, you have a jump down the middle C. Well, a C to a C, obviously, almost all the time is going to be 5 to 1. That's just logical. So in the last measure, you've got your thumb on C for 2 counts, and then we've got C and A. That's a 6 right there, interval of a 6 for 2 counts. Now, if you look at measure 1 on the 2nd line, we've got C and G, and that G is with the 4th finger. In measure 2 on the 2nd line, we're going to take our thumb. They don't mention this, but you're going to take your thumb and jump down to A. I don't think we've seen that note too often. So 1 ledger line below the line is a middle C. 2 ledger lines below is A below middle C. Now notice where I put my 3rd and 5th finger. I'm already anticipating beats 3 and 4, this D and F. So you're going to use the 3rd and 4th finger. Now, the next measure is going to be a test of finger strength, but you want to use 2 and 4. See my 2 and 4 over the C and the E? That's where you're going to go on beat 1. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky because we have a C sharp coming up. So what I would recommend, let's see. Let me look at this. No. I stand corrected. Let's keep it right here. So we've got C and E with 2 and 4. On beat 2, you're going to go C and D. The 2nd finger that's on C, go ahead and move that up to C sharp. And then you'll have 4th finger on E. So this is where it gets a little tricky. You're really going to have to work the fingering in a situation like this. And then finally, 5 on the F. Let's go through that again. Back on the 2nd measure, you got your thumb on A, 3 and 5 on the D and F. And then right here, really work the fingers. 2 and 4 on C and E. And then keep all your fingering here for C and D. Your 4th finger is going to be on E, and your 2nd finger comes up to C sharp. Now notice the C sharp is held. It's a half note. We got 2-part writing. So you're going to hold the C sharp when you move to F. And then when we get to the 3rd line, notice we have a C natural and a D. C natural and D played with 2 and 3. Like that. And then our thumb comes down to B. C, and then we got B and D. We have the B on beat 3 being held again for 2 counts. And you move to E with your 4th finger. And then in the first ending, 2nd measure, this is the first ending, we have C. Make sure that C is with your 2nd finger so you can go to the G7 chord right there with your thumb on the B. Got that? C's with that 2nd finger, and you can easily go to our G7 chord. And remember, the G7 chord is just B, F, and G. Now at this point, we repeat back to the beginning. So if your thumb's on B, yes, you're going to have to move it up to C when you go back to the beginning. That's perfectly fine. Remember, pedaling is going to smoothen this out. So everything's the same again. We got our jump, measure 2, logical fingering. Measure 3, thumb down to middle C, C and A. 2nd line, C and G. Now in the second measure, thumb comes down to A, D and F, C and E, and then the 2/8 notes, C to D, C sharp and E, hold the C sharp, move up to F. Third line, C and D, and then our 8th notes, B and C. And on beat 3, B and D, hold the B, move to E, jump over to the second ending now, the third measure, second ending. And we also, once again, have our second finger on middle C. Now we've got an 8th rest. That 8th rest is going to give you just enough time to jump up. And on the end of beat 4, we've got our third finger on G. Now when we go to the next measure, we have a pattern here of E and G on every beat. Got it? So that's simply 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, as soon as you can, notice this is mezzo piano. I don't want to go into dynamics too much yet, but on this piece, you want to avoid this on the piano. If you do that, you're going to absolutely ruin this song. This is actually a really gorgeous part of this piece, but it has to be soft and easy and very smooth. Well, a little bit louder than that. So as soon as you can, work on that. You might make little rotations with the wrists like I'm doing. That's one option. Be careful that the thumb isn't too clumsy. So you're going to probably be lighter on the thumb. But anytime on the piano you have a lot of repetition, you have to be pretty easy with it. Otherwise, that can happen and it just ruins the piece very quickly. So that was 1 on E and 3 on G. Now, when we go to the bottom line, we have F and G. It's the same pattern. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And then in the second measure, we have E and A. It's going to be 1 on the E and 4 on the A. Again on beat 3 and 4. Now let's take a look at this last measure. This gets a little confusing for people. There's several things that's happening in the last measure. The first thing I want you to notice is going to be the most helpful. You are actually playing an E and an A once again. If you compare measure 2 and measure 3, it's the exact same notes. It's going to be the exact same fingering. However, look above it. It says both hands, so the left hand's going to do this too. 8 VA, 1 octave higher. So when you're done hitting the E and the A in measure 2, keep that 1 and 4 sort of locked and bring it up 1 octave. And you're basically doing it again. The difference here is it's rolled. You see the wiggly line there? That means it's rolled. Now when you roll it, it's a half note. The first one I'm looking at, a half note, 2 beats. So once you roll, hold down the A. Now the pedal is going to do it too, but it's going to make it easier if you just hold it with your fingers. Now the left hand's going to get in on this roll too. So you're not going to, your first note when you put all of it together is not going to be the E. In fact, the way we do a roll, the way I like to do a roll, is roll all the notes before the last note, which will hit on beat 1. So when we do the hands together, that A comes in on beat 1. So the A is the melody note. There's actually not a melody there. There's no words, but the A is the most important note. So you want to hold it, and you want to be a little bit louder with it too. These notes are sort of decoration, ornamentation they call it. But the A, you want it to be a little stronger because, partially because it's going to be on beat 1. And we'll get to that when we do hands together, but for now in the right hand, just practice making sure the E and the A are just nice and even. Well, it's not really even. There's only 2 notes and you're going to hold the A. But make sure that A is a little bit louder. Be light with the E and the thumb. And you can also do like a little circular wrist motion if that helps. You definitely want to put your weight rolling towards the A. So you're just kind of light on that E. You're just popping off of it. but you're certainly putting more, you're leaning into the A. So when you do these two measures, measure 2 and measure 3, you're on, once again, E and A for 2 counts, 1 and 2 and again for 3 and 4 and then you're going to jump up 1. Make sure A is on beat 1. Don't go 1 and, no, it's 1. 1 on the A, 1 and 2 and then you roll it again, 3, make sure it's on beat 3, the A, 3 and 4. And the and is actually going to be the last note back here. You're coming back to the 3 on G. Notice the 8 VA, the octave higher, ends on the second roll. And then you're going to jump down. And 1. So beat 1 is on the top of page 97. We're actually repeating the EG pattern that we had at the end of the 3rd line on page 96. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now it's a little different, this pattern, on the second measure, different notes, but still the same pattern, F sharp to A. And remember, it's going to stay F sharp the entire measure, 1 and that's 2 on the F sharp, 4 on the A. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now here's a very tricky spot of this piece. Look carefully. Fingering is really going to help you. You've got 2 on the F sharp. You had 4 on the A. You're going to squeeze that thumb into F natural and bring that 5 in tight to hit B. Now, for me, I have small hands, and that feels like a bit of a squeeze. It's very awkward, but it's going to work for what's to come. So make sure you get thumb on the F natural, 5 on the B. Now on beats 3 and 4, look at my second finger. It's already over F sharp, and I'm still going to play 5 on B. That's even tighter. But when you go to measure 1 on the second line, you're going to go back to the thumb on F natural, and then you're going to stretch your 5 over to D. So the fingering we just did help set this up a little bit better. And then on beats 3 and 4, you've got F and A. I've got my second finger over A, so I'm just going to do 1 and 2. It could be 1 and 3, but regardless, it doesn't matter because in the second measure, you've got to bring your thumb down to middle C. Now, this is just like the beginning. There is some small differences, but you've got thumb on C. So this is the second line, second measure. You're going to jump up to the E and C. So all this is like the beginning. Last measure, we're going to jump down to C. But here, instead of C and A, we're going to go to F and A. Now that should be 3 and 5. 3 on the F, 5 on the A. And that's going to put 2 and 4 on E and G at the beginning of the 3rd line. Okay, second measure of the 3rd line, we're going to bring our thumb down to A, just like we did on the first page. Now it's odd that here they've actually put in the fingering for us. They didn't do it on the first page. That's very odd indeed. Why they would do it the second time, not the first time. Hopefully this lines up with the fingering that we did. It actually doesn't, but let's give it a look. So we may change this. So the second measure, I got thumb on A, 3 and 5 on D and F, so that checks out. Last measure, C and E with, let's do 2 and 4. Now I had you stay on the 2. They have you doing 1 and 3. I see how that actually can work. Because then you're not bringing the 2 from C up to C sharp. You're putting that thumb in there. You're still going to do 3 on the D. Yeah, I could see. I kind of like that. I wish I had noticed that at the first page. But I do like bringing this thumb under to C on the 8th notes. Keeping the 3 on the D. That makes a really smooth motion into the C sharp and E. Whereas earlier, we kept the 2 on C, and and that doesn't make it quite as smooth. I'll leave it up to you guys. I think both will work fine. I do lean towards the thumb as a smoother motion, but in the end, you've also got the pedaling, so that's really going to help a lot. I'll leave it up to you, though. If you've already learned it with the 2, I would say keep it. It's fine because that works well. The last note of the third line, we've got 5 on the F. Next line, this is just like page 96. C and D, C natural and D, down to B, B and D. Remember to hold the B, the half note, and we'll end it on C with our second finger. This also repeats going on into the last measure. That G continues to come in on the and of beat 4, E and G. So that's the same. Bottom line, F and G. Right here on beat 3, the thumb, I've circled this in my book, the thumb moves to F. We've got second finger. We need the thumb to move to F. And the reason for that is so we can go 2 on G, 3 on A, 4 on B, and have a nice, easy landing on E and C. Obviously, if we keep the 2 there, we're going to run out of fingers, and we're going to have to do that, which is not smooth. Even with pedaling, it's just not very good. So circle that thumb on beat 3. That's important. So in the second measure, we land with E and C. And we've got a pattern here in the last 2 measures that actually makes more sense when we put the left hand with it. So I'm going to hold off and wait when we do the left hand to go through the ending here, because it's just a repetitive pattern between the left hand and right hand of the exact same rhythms and notes. Okay, so that covers the right hand notes. Rhythmically, I'm not going to go through the details. At this point, you should be pretty comfortable with all these rhythms. I would recommend counting the whole piece. Sometimes I try to avoid going through 1 and 2 and if there's only 1 or 2 eighth notes, but there's a lot of eighth notes in this piece. That being said, you also have some long notes. So be very aware of your half notes, like at the beginning, that you don't rush them in conjunction with eighth notes later on. So, for example, the very first measure, I've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, jump down to the third line, last measure on page 96. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So I just played that at the same speed. And obviously it's much, much busier because they're all eighth notes. Now that's an easy example because the pattern. But you want to make sure that if you're playing your eighth notes at this speed, that you play your half notes at the same speed. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Got it? So what I recommend is a lot of times when you start a piece with longer notes, like half notes, it's so easy to just rush them, right? And then when we go to the second measure, we end up slowing it down because there's more notes. So when you start this piece, think about a measure like the third line, last measure. Think about how fast, how comfortable are you playing 1 and 2 and. Make sure you got that count in your head. Go back to the beginning and go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, right? It's really important on a piece that you do that. The measures where that third finger comes in on the G, that's very important that comes in right on the and you're solid with it. So the first time that happens is on page 96, the third line right before the last measure. So the second ending there, you're down on middle C, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and. So whenever you have an eighth note at the very end of a measure, practice going into beat 1 or maybe beats 1 and 2 of the next measure. Because what happens is a lot of times we may hold that note too long and then go into the next measure. You do that enough, you get used to this, and you end up holding it like a quarter note or a dotted quarter note or something. So you need to practice playing it in rhythm into the next measure, and 1 and 2 and. I would recommend doing that several times. Now, the same thing happens at the bottom of the page going to the top of 97. It's actually the same notes and the exact same rhythm. Now you're coming to it from a different place, because at the bottom of 96, remember the roll that we're an octave higher? And there's a trick with pedal, which I'll show you later, that'll help you get down here. But when you get down here, just remember it's and 1 and 2 and. So again, practice going into the next measure. And we have it one more time on page 97, the fourth line down, second measure going into the last measure, and 1 and 2 and. So it's always the G going into E. So it's very consistent note-wise. So again, be very, very careful with your counting throughout this. Eighth notes are obviously your fastest rhythm. Wherever you're comfortable counting eighth notes, apply that to the very beginning when you have your half notes. One more thing, when you're on page 96, the second line first measure, be very careful. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That's a whole note. Make sure you don't rush that. Now, when you put the left hand with it, that'll help. But still be very aware that you don't want to rush it. You don't want to rush it. Because when you put this whole piece together, and if you rush some measures and slow down other measures, the average listener, who's not even a musician but knows this song, is going to be like, "What are you doing? That's not how the song goes. You're all over the place." So the rhythms are more important than you think. As a player, we're so involved with thinking about notes and fingering and all this. Sometimes we just don't even consider the importance of rhythm. We're just like, "Oh, I played the right note. I got the right note. Yes, good. Yes, I got it. I did it." And the person that's listening probably doesn't even recognize a wrong note nearly as much as an inconsistent rhythm, because they're singing along, they're humming along, they've heard this piece all their life, and that's what they remember. So think about that when you're working on rhythms. If you haven't applied that already, we tend to think notes are number 1 and then rhythms are number 2. Yes, we work on notes first, but that's half of the piece. Rhythm is the other half of music. Rhythm is just as important. And like I said, for the average listener, probably more important. For a dancer, dancers could care less if you hit a wrong note. That doesn't affect their rhythm. That doesn't affect their dance. But if you are inconsistent with your tempos and your rhythms, that will affect their movement. So I always say, no matter what the piece is, maybe it's a waltz, maybe it's a ballad, maybe it's a techno, whatever. Think about, ask yourself, can someone dance to this? All right, so let's look at our left hand. So our left hand does start in the C position. We actually have a C chord down here in the bass, C, E, and G. 2 counts. Now, we are going to A. I would take that with the thumb. That just seems logical. Then in our next measure, they fingered it for us, so I think this works great. 5 on the E and 3 on the G. That's a dotted half note. And then on beat 4, we're going to keep that 5 on the E, and we're going to bring our thumb to B flat. Now, this is where it gets tricky, because if you're not anticipating the B flat, look at where my thumb is. It's nowhere near it. B flat's up here. So you get a lot of times you get someone doing this, making this huge movement up. And it's very awkward. It can be very clumsy. So like I've said throughout the book, if you can play up and into the keys, especially when you get here, now look where my thumb's at. That's so much better. It looks better. It's smoother. It's just easier. The hardest thing about it is getting your fingers in there. And if you have really big hands, really long fingers, that's not so easy. But for a lot of us, I think it's just practice. It's just getting used to this. It does require stronger fingers. You're not relying on hand movement as much or arm movement. You're required to use fingers now. In our last measure, we're going to F and A. Speaking of using fingers, they're right there, but that's tricky. That requires a lot of strength, especially with that 4th finger. So you're going to practice going from here to here. Now the key, a lot of times, is bend your fingers like you're holding a ball. When I bend that fourth finger and use the tip, I get a lot of control. Going into the second line, we've got 5 on E. And then on beats 3 and 4, we've got our thumb on B. Probably just take the second finger to B flat, make it nice and smooth. There is a little legato. They mark there. My 4 is already on F for the second measure. I've got 2 on A flat, 3 on G for the last measure. Now notice they marked 2 on G, so we've got something coming up in the next measure or so. So this 2 to G is going to prepare us. We have an A natural, that's just a reminder, because in the previous measure we hit A flat. And down on the third line, I would take the third finger to F sharp. And then we've got a big change here. My second finger is kind of hovering over G sharp, but we're going to have to bring it down to F natural. Now be careful with that. F sharp and F natural are right next to each other. But because of 3 on F sharp and 2 on F natural, it is a little tricky. So be careful with that change. Now you're going to put thumb on G. And then our next measure, which is our first ending, we got 3 on E, G, and then down to D, G, and that sets us up beautifully when we repeat to the beginning for our C chord. All right, so then we got our thumb up to A. Make sure you get 5 and 3 on the next measure. My thumb is not quite where it should be, so I'm going to have to slide a little bit. So I would practice that to make sure you're up in the keys a little bit more. Probably make note that when you hit the E and the G, that's when you need to be kind of up in the keys. Now in the last measure, I've got F and A. Second line, down to E, B, B flat. Second measure, F, A flat. Last measure, G. You might circle this 2 to remind us to switch to 2 on G. A natural. Third line, F sharp. And this is a big one. I had to circle it, that 2 to F natural. Skip over to your second ending now. It's just like the first ending. We got E, G, D, G, and then we end up on C. Now, your thumb's on G, but in this last measure, you're going to have to bring 2 to G because your thumb needs to come up to A on beat 3. Back to G. Careful down on the bottom line that you move your fifth finger up to D. Don't assume 5 is on C. 5 is actually moving to D. And then you're still going to play G, A, and G. Now you have C and G in measure 2. You're going to have to move your fingers. You might have to write this in. 5 down to C, thumb down to G. Right now my 5 is on D and my thumb is on A. So I've got to keep that position, but I'm going to bring it down to C and G. And then you have it again on beats 3 and 4. Now, this is the spot where you have the roll in both hands on this last measure, and both hands go up the octave. So the C and G is going to come up here. And just like we rolled the right hand, C first and G second. You're going to you can rotate your wrist a little bit. Put a little bit more weight to the thumb. Not that the G needs to be really loud, because in the end, when we do both hands, it's actually, what's my fingering here? Yeah, thumb and 4. It's actually the A that's the most important note. But I say put a little more weight, which shouldn't be hard because it's thumb, because you're rolling in that direction. So that's just going to help move things in that direction. Now, that being said, the pinky's still important. You got to hit the C because that's the root of the chord. But you want everything to move this way. And that's going to make that roll work out much better in the long run when you put hands together. But in the left hand, just work on getting the C to G. Now, both these notes are technically going to be before beat 1, because when you hit the A, that's going to be on beat 1. So this will actually be before. So both of them are half notes, and they're both up the octave. And then when you get to the top of 97, you're back down here. But when you come back down here, don't go to the C position. Go to, I think this was the extended C position. You're going to need that 2-1-G. So you see beat 2, there's a 2-1-G. So you got C, G, A, G. Now this is tricky. We have an E flat in measure 2. Logically, my 4th finger's there, but I'm going to need my 5th finger so that I can get up to 2 on A and my thumb on middle C. And then back to A. And the last measure, I've got to drop that 5th finger down to D. This is a little tricky here because I'm working my 5 and 4. I got to take my 4th finger to E flat. And then I'm going back to D with the 5th finger on the 2nd line. And then you're going to take that thumb to B. Now it does repeat. It's kind of like the beginning here, but the left hand is a little different. First off, instead of a C chord, you actually have this. It's not really a C 5-finger pattern. What we have is C, D, E, and then it skips F and goes to G. It also skips the fingers because it actually goes C, D, E, G, A. So since we're going up to A, we've got to do this stretch. So 3 on E, bring your 2nd finger over to G, and then finish with your thumb on A. Now in the next measure, you're going to have to bring 5 and 3 over. You can use this A. I didn't mention this in the beginning, the 1st and 2nd measure, but you can use that thumb on A to bring your hand over. So kind of gripping this A and using it to twist, and you can let that 5 and 3 fall right in. They might have to really bend the fingers to get that 5 and 3. I should have mentioned this at the beginning too. It's the same idea. What we're facing here though is also making sure, like the beginning, we have that thumb close to B flat, because on beat 4, there's the E and B flat. Now, this is where it's going to be a little confusing. If you look at the end of the first line on page 96, you have F and A, 2 and 4, which is right there. Here, at the end of the 2nd line on 97, we have F and A, 5 and 3, though. And when that happens, when it's not logical fingering, it means we've got to reposition for something coming up. So go to 5 and 3. That puts 2 on B. And this is what it was that we were moving for. The 3rd line, 1st measure, it's a D with the thumb. Now make sure, of course, you bring your 2nd finger to C. This is a little tricky. We've got 3 on B, 4 on B flat, and then we have this A in parenthesis. Now, normally that A would just be played with 5. Here's what I suggest. The reason it's in parenthesis is it's the same note. It's the same A on the piano you're playing in the right hand. You're going to play it with the right hand because the right hand is melody. You're not going to play it with the left hand because, 1, your right hand's going to play it. 2, this is a little tricky. It's very tight. And instead of having to worry about the A, use that moment to get out of the way, let the right hand play, and then your left hand comes in on beat 3 right here on the A flat. So when you practice the left hand at the beginning of the 3rd line, D, C, B, squeeze the B flat in, jump during that A, and then land on A flat on beat 3. The reason why that A is even there is someone was thinking orchestrally, or perhaps like a chorus, that you might have more than one instrument if you're in an orchestra playing that A. But on piano, it's one instrument. Now, piano acts like an orchestra because it covers, a range of pitches. But in an orchestra, I could have 2 different instruments playing the exact same note. I can't do that on piano. So they're saying that this A is melody. This A is also a bass note. But again, you can't play both at the same time. So we're just going to take it with our right hand. So then we've got A flat with 2. Now, in the last measure, you have to bring that thumb under to G. Got it? And then it gets a little tricky because you're going to bring that 2nd finger over to G on beat 3. and then thumb on A natural. Going down to the fourth line, that should have your third finger on F sharp. We did this on the first page, and remember bringing the 2 to F natural. Tricky move there. But then now we're good to go with the G, and then E, G, and down to C. Rest on beat 4, and then the last measure, C. Bring that 2 over to G for the extended position. Thumb on A, back to G. Bottom line, 5 on the D. We still have G, A, and G. Now the last 2 measures, remember I said they work together, right hand, left hand. So the right hand is on the C and the E. The left hand's going to go down. You're going to bring your 5th finger down to C. So the notes in the left hand start this little pattern. C, D, E, G. You skip the F. C, D, E, G. Now the right hand's going to copy it on beats 3 and 4. C, D, E, G. Now the left hand plays in the treble clef on the last measure. See the LH? That LH is your left hand. That 5 is for your pinky. You're going to cross over the right hand, and you're going to play the notes exactly where they are right here, but with your left hand. And guess what? It's the same pattern. C, D, E, and G. And you're going to bring your right hand under, and the very last note is C, which I recommend with your 3rd finger. And that's marked with the right hand, RH. 3rd finger is the most balanced. You'll have the most control. Get softer. We got a decrescendo, diminuendo, so you want to have a lot of control. So you have the same grouping of 4 eighth notes 3 times. C, D, E, G. C, D, E, G. C, D, E, G, C. Notice my motions. Now this is where it's going to be a little tricky. When I'm playing the right hand right here, watch my left hand. The reason it's crossing like that in smooth motion is so that I can continue the music uninterrupted. So if I have these smooth motions, then I'm creating the smooth music. If you do this, see what happens? You can't move in the last moment. So you've got to practice moving your left hand so it's right there. As soon as you finish the right hand, to the ear, it's like there was never a break. No one should know that your left hand crossed over. It looks cool, it's flashy, but to the listener, they shouldn't even know. All the listener should hear is just 12 nice, even eighth notes, just getting smoother and slower and softer. Same thing when my left hand's playing here, my right hand's coming under. Whoops, sorry about that. And it's right there. Because again, if I wait, I'm not going to have control. I'm not going to be delicate. So on one hand, it's easy because it's the same pattern, same notes. On the other hand, musically, it's a little challenging. It's the end of the piece. It's the most important part of the piece, how we end the piece. And especially this piece, it's getting softer. Now it is getting slower, so it gives you more time too. And that makes for a very, very nice, effective ending. So the left hand, a lot like the right hand, rhythmically, you want to go through it, make sure the eighth notes coincide with the other notes. There actually aren't hardly any eighth notes, I realize now, in the left hand. So one thing that kind of works, I mean, it's kind of cheating a little bit, but it also does really work if you want to save some time. I recommend going through your right hand rhythmically, the counting and everything. And it makes sense because there are so many rhythms in your right hand. The right hand is the melody. It is the most important part. Your left hand just kind of supports. It's structure. It's more harmonies. It's not as melodic. So when you put the hands together, and if you've done all that rhythmic work in the right hand, it just becomes kind of logical the way the hands work together rhythmically, right? For example, in the first measure, if I've got used to counting these half notes in the right hand, 1 and 2 and, well, my left hand's playing a half note as well. So it's just going to be together, 1 and 2, and 3, and 4, and, right? It makes sense. In measure 2, I'm just hanging out for 3 beats. I'm hanging out until I move to beat 4. So I'm kind of focused more on the right hand rhythm in measure 2. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and, right? But before you get into all those rhythms hands together, you really got to work on coordinating. And this is where it gets tricky. This is where it's going to take probably the most work. Hands separate is challenging. Putting them together is going to be the head scratcher. Enjoying my coffee this morning. It's also drying out my throat. Coffee does not help when you're talking a lot. So I'm not going to dig into rhythms a whole lot, like I said, but I'm certainly not going to dig into them now that we're putting the hands together. So in the beginning, like I said, it's half notes and half notes. Now, this is already a big jump. So if you worked on it in both hands individually, great. Now you got to work on getting it together. Now, I like to think about when I'm putting hands together, which direction do they move? In this case, they both move to the right, so that helps a lot. In the next measure, I'm focused on that left hand, getting that 5 and 3 in there. My right hand's right where it needs to be. The other thing is getting that left hand up into the keys so I can prepare for the B flat. Right here on beat 4. Now in the last measure, it's my right hand that's making the big move. My left hand just kind of falls into the F and the A. And going into the second line, everything should just fall right in. So logical fingering. Now this is where it gets tricky. It gets tight. Because look at where my left hand is for second measure. 4 on F. I'm doing great. But look at my right hand. I got to have my thumb on the A. Now sometimes people ask me, well, why don't I just do it with my left hand? I wouldn't do it. I want to keep the melody and the bass separate from each other because I have more control of making the melody louder if I'm doing it in a separate hand. I can't do that as well with one hand. So you're going to have to really move that left hand out of the way. We didn't practice that when we did the left hand by itself. In fact, we said, hey, the A flat's right there. I don't have to move my hand. But now, when you put the hands together, you do have to move your hand and you got to come back. So when you go to the A flat, your right hand's going to move up to the D and the F. Now the last measure should fall into place. Now in the right hand, we said you could do 2. You could also do the 1 like they had on page 97. Beat 3 is important because of the left hand change. And you've got to hold this C sharp in the right hand going into beat 4. That's tricky. Going into the third line, that's kind of right there. But when we go into beat 3, the left hand, that's got that big move 2 to the F natural. And then you're going to hold this B when you go to beat 4. So that's a little tricky. And then we go to our first ending. And then here's our big G7 chord. Now we're going to repeat back to the beginning. You're going to have to move your right hand a little bit. See the thumb? We talked about that earlier. And everything just repeats. Bring that left hand up. Bring it up like into the keys. And that'll really help us on beat 4. So I'm in great position right here for my E and B flat. Bring that right hand down to C. Second line. Still up in the keys is going to be helpful because here's that B flat again. Now in the second measure, remember, move your left hand sort of over, tilt it. So I sneak that thumb in the right hand. And then the last measure, everything should fall into place. Switch the left hand here on beat 3 to 2. Third line. Second finger in the left hand to F natural. Now jump over to your second ending. Now here you definitely want to work this rhythmically. We spoke earlier about the right hand going and 1 and 2 and. So be ready for that when you put the hands together. So at the beginning of the second ending, we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and. The other thing is you got to be ready to go with the second finger moving to G on beat 2. So we're putting all of our attention into this rhythm of and 1 and. It's so easy to leave that thumb there. And then you're like, oh, what do I do with the A? I guess I could cross over. But ultimately, you need that 2 to move to G. So you're probably going to want to circle that because I bet that's going to sneak up on you if you're really focused on the rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and then switch. Now this works out in these next two measures. You do have to worry about the finger switching, but what I like about these two measures I'm playing is rhythmically it's very even. 2 eighth notes per quarter note. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So it coordinates very, very well. Going into, let's see, the bottom line. All right, now here we go. We're on the second measure. We got to make sure we get C and G and E and A all together. And we're going to do it again. Now, keep both hands locked. We're going to bring them up the octave. And remember the roll, start with your left hand. Now, I'm doing the roll kind of slow right now, just to focus on the evenness. So, evenness, you want all the notes to be equal. You're going to hold the A out, yes, but notice the C, G, E, and A all entered at even times. I didn't go, it's not uneven, right? That's uneven. That won't work. So practice on the evenness. Evenness is probably the most important thing with a roll. Then practice on making it soft and gentle. And of course, all the motion, if you have to put a little effort with your hands, the wrists, the arms, everything aims towards that A. And remember, the A is on beat 1, so it can be a little bit louder. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Now that's going to be a big transition. So you're working on these, and then you're going to bring both hands back. To make things easy, well, I was about to say C position, but if you look in your right hand, it's the extended C position. You're going C to that 2 on G again at the top of page 97. And your right hand's basically E minor position, so if that helps, that's where you're aiming. So you don't want to just aim your right hand, because here's what happens. The eighth note in the right hand is going to end up being too long because you're taking the time to figure out your left hand. Remember what we said, so important. And 1. So this will help when we have pedal, because when I have pedal, I'm holding it out and I can move ahead of time. So the pedal's really going to help you there. As soon as you're done, lift and be in play. Now the other thing is, musically, there's no words there. This is just kind of an effect. So you could throw in a little fermata. Not very long, but just a slight hold there. You could actually pause the music. And that's a little cheat where musically it works. It'll sound nice, and that'll give you a little extra time to set things up. But you definitely don't want to go and have your left hand over here. You got to be ready. Otherwise, that G is not going to be an eighth note. It's going to be held too long. So here we are at the top of the next page. And this was just like the first measure at the bottom of 96. But here it gets tricky. I'm moving to 5 on E flat and 2 on F sharp. Now I've got black keys at the same time. That helps with coordination. Going to black keys at the same time. But it's 5 and it's 2 with my fingering. So that's very tricky. Remember, the F sharp is F sharp the entire measure. Now these notes may sound a little awkward when you're practicing slowly. It's meant to build tension in this section. It'll make more sense when you get the piece together. So in the last measure, this is where it gets real tricky. I got 5 on D, thumb and 5, F natural and B. This is the squeeze. And then E flat. We're going to black keys again. E flat and F sharp again, by the way. So familiarity. Different finger though on the E flat. Fourth finger. We still have 2 on the F sharp though. And then we got this expansion in the right hand on the second line, F and the D. You're going back to D in the left hand. So we got D's with our 5th fingers. So that helps coordinate. And then kind of meet in the middle here. Thumbs are on B and F, and then we have 2 on A. Or 3 on A, whatever's more comfortable. You can do 3 on A. Doesn't really matter, because either way you're going to jump down to middle C. Now, both hands go to C's. That's nice. That feels pretty good. Remember the left hand does C, D, E, G, and then jump up in your right hand. And that's just like the beat 3 and 4 of the beginning of the song. Bring your left hand up to E and G. Play up in the keys for our E and B flat. Last measure. Now remember, I went to the 2 and 4. That's wrong. That's what it does on page 96. So I would circle this. You got to go to 3 and 5 because now things are going to be different. I need the second finger on B. And then I'm going to stretch even further on the third line to thumb on D. This is real tight. Look at this. So I got to get my thumb and the right hand out of the way. Maybe tuck it under or just put it out there. This is where it gets real tight here. And now I'm going to move both hands to the left. But the A is only going to be played with my right hand. I'm going to aim the second finger in the left hand for the A flat. And so that way I'm ready to go right there on beats 3 and 4. Now, the next measure, I've got to bring my thumb under in the left hand to G. I should be right there for C and E. And you could either keep the 2 on the 8th note, C, or bring the thumb under. Now on beat 3, I've got to bring my second finger to this G in the left hand. And this is just like page 96 on the third line. Beat 3, I've got my 2. I can't bring it under. I didn't mention that earlier, but don't do this. Just move it over. Pedal will make it smooth. And then we're on the second measure, 4th line of 97. We got to rest on beat 4 and then and 1. So keep that rhythm in mind. So we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Now C's right there, but remember the G, you're going to once again move to the second finger. So and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that should help move your 5 to D here on the bottom line. Now on beat 3, remember the right hand, thumb on the F. So that's a little tricky. A in the left hand, F on the thumb in the right hand, F, G, and then move to G in the left hand on beat 4, A in the right hand. And then we've got our little pattern. C, D, E, G, C, D, E, G. And remember the motions. All right. So that covers the coordination. Very, very tricky. There's a lot of spots there. I would say the fingering is probably one of the toughest things about this piece. The fingering is certainly very, very helpful. There's a lot of spots where it's just like, I don't want to go to that fingering. Remember, if they mark something and it feels awkward in the moment or unnecessary, it's always preparing you for what's to come. they're basically switching in and out in an easy place, especially if your 3's on G and then you go to 2 on G. That's pretty easy to do. But, you know, if you have to do some big jump, some really big jump later on because you didn't do that simple switch, then it all makes sense. Now, rhythmically, as I was saying earlier, some of it, you know, just makes sense when you put the hands together. The first measure, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And the second measure, let the right hand do the work. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And the next measure, the right hand, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And I'm kind of rushing it, but you get the idea, right? Don't rush this measure. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And it's so easy to do this. That sounds pretty. It's nice. You kind of want to do it. But it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... So you got to take your time on those spots that are tempting to rush. Obviously, where you have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and that's pretty logical too. Remember the bottom of 96, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and this is measure 2. Going into measure 3. So this is an important place to count because you could rush it and you've got these rolls. So on the second measure, we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. 1. Make sure you get that on 1. If that's hard to do, really slow it down. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and that's one of the hardest spots because it's on the page turn, or page, not turn, but you know, the next page. You got to get both hands into play and be ready to go right there. Otherwise, you're going to end up going and 1, and you're going to ruin that note by holding it way too long. All right, a lot of it's pretty repetitious at that point. So the last thing is the pedal. So let's bring up the pedal cam. Okay, so hopefully we don't take too much longer. This has already gone over an hour, so you can see the amount of detail going into a piece like this. But hopefully this is all making sense, and I did want to still take the time and break it down for you. Now, the pedaling is pretty self-explanatory. Wherever it's marked, you pedal. But let's look at this together. So you can already have your foot down at the very beginning because there's nothing being played without pedal. So that'll give you a little advantage if your foot's already down. Now in this next beat 3, this next chord, you're going to, remember when you pedal, you go down on the keys, up on the pedal, and then right back down. Now, it could actually be a smaller motion than that. I'm just exaggerating, but it's going to be real quick, but I'm just breaking it down for you. As soon as I go down on the keys, I pop off and then back down. You're going to do it on beat 1 on the next measure, beat 4, and beat 1 of the next measure. So there's more frequent pedaling. And then beat 1 of the second line. Now, the rule is whenever you have a note like a B going to the very next key, a B flat, you got to pedal. Because if I don't, you hear that? It starts getting really muddy, really clashing very quickly. That's just a general rule. So you got to pedal here on the B flat, and we're going to pedal again on the second measure and on beat 3. So there's just a lot more pedaling. You definitely want to have all your notes, all your fingering, even your rhythms down. Now, I say have the rhythms down because if you're focused on pedaling, it's probably going to sacrifice your rhythm, and that's okay. I want you to slow it down, but at this point, I want you to be aware of what the rhythms are and being able to play it so that when you come back to it, this also has pedal right here. This is that tricky spot. I don't want you to do pedals so soon before you learn your rhythms so that it affects learning your rhythms, if that makes sense. Now, the first ending, you're going to pedal on beat 1 and beat 3. Now, when you go back to the beginning, you will pedal here. Got it? And then everything else is the same. Take as much time as you need. So like right here, make sure everything's lined up. Because you can hold the pedal down, you can keep it down, and you can put your hands wherever you want and come back as long as you keep the pedal down. As soon as you hit the chord, that's when you lift the pedal. Got it? You don't want to lift the pedal too soon. So if I do this, see what I did? I lift the pedal before I hit those notes. So I lost the sound. Here's that B flat, we got a pedal there. Next measure, we pedal on beat 1, again on beat 3. Last measure, we pedal on beat 1. Got the finger switch and the pedal, so be really comfortable with these finger switches, because learning that and pedal at the same time, that's a lot of work. You got to take it in layers. Now we go to the second ending. We pedal on beat 1 and on beat 3. Bring your right hand up, and you got to pedal here. So don't let that affect your rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and so work on that. Bottom line, pedal on beat 1. Here we are on the second measure, pedal. Now it's the same chord again, so you don't have to pedal. Even on the roll, you don't have to pedal. They're the same notes, even though they're an octave higher. And when you come down, use the pedal to hold the sound. So I said this earlier, you can go ahead and move and be in position. And 1 and 2. Top of page 97, we're going to pedal on the second measure. Since these notes repeat, you don't have to pedal in the measure. Now, here you're going to have to pedal every one of these chords, because everyone is different, and it's going to get real muddy if you don't pedal carefully. Same thing here on the second line and this last chord. And going into the second measure, we're going to pedal here too. Pedal. Third measure, pedal. Make sure your left hand's up into the keys. Pedal here on beat 4. And the last measure, pedal on everything. Pedal again. I messed up my fingering. Third line, we're going to pedal here. Now here, they don't have you pedaling C and B. I would pedal that because those are two keys right next to each other. So I would pedal that one. So go ahead and write that in, and the B flat, and of course going to the A, and then the A flat with the D and the F. So everything we're playing here is getting pedaled. Last measure, you can hold these eighth notes with the pedal. Beat 3, we're going to pedal. You can hold it on 4. Fourth line, we're going to pedal. And again on beat 3. And the next measure, beat 1. Now you got a little break, complete break. That's for music, actually. That's just the effect. This just gives it a big ending, and then it's like, oh, here's my little tag. So that's just for effect. Pedal at the bottom here. We got a retardando, so we're gradually slowing down. You could probably speed this up and then be slowing it down. And of course the last two measures are all the same patterns of notes, so you can hold that pedal down. So it's the same concepts with the pedaling. It's easy. It's just there's so much more of it, and that's what makes it hard. It happens more often than you'd think. It's not like the beginning of every measure. All right, so that basically is it. There's some dynamics thrown in, which are pretty obvious. Mezzo fortes, softs, louds. Actually, I don't think there's a forte. But I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up and just play it through for you. I'll also put up a separate video eventually where you can just access that just to hear and not having to scroll through this video. So let's go ahead and take it from the very beginning. I'll give a little count off and then we'll just play it straight through. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... I did not pedal that. Let me start again. Here we go. So it really is a gorgeous arrangement. Very, very nice arrangement. Very tough though. A lot of work to do. A lot of work to do on this piece, but I think your reward is just going to be very nice piece of music that a lot of people are familiar with and will definitely enjoy. You probably heard me put in some, expression and dynamics that aren't even written, and that's the cool thing about this piece. You can kind of play around with it, be expressive beyond what the music says. I did play it slower than probably the average person will play. That's just my preference. I just like taking my time with this piece because it's just so nice. The harmonies are so nice, and it just gives me some wiggle room to go a little bit faster in places and slow down in places as well. All right, I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Thanks for sticking it out. So I ended up making a very long video after all. It was hard to avoid. There's a lot of information. I wanted to break it down for you guys. So please let me know if you have any questions, comments, like and subscribe. We're going to go through the rest of these pieces. And then when we're done with this book, we're just going to go right on into level 2. So I hope you've been enjoying it. These will take a bit longer. You can also skip these and go on to level 2 because, again, this is just, there's nothing new you're learning here, but I wouldn't recommend it. You do want, this is why we're doing this, right? This is where we can finally apply everything and have some really good music. So take your time. Some of these pieces could require weeks. This could require weeks. It depends how much you practice. If you get 2 hours a day, you might get this piece down in, a week or two. If you do 30 minutes, you're looking maybe a month to play it. And when I say play it, I don't just mean notes and rhythms. I mean play it well, play it musically, play it comfortably. But that's just I'm just throwing that out there. It's going to be a little different for everyone. All right, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.